It's Fill Your Plate Now, where every bite brings you closer to the farm gate and further from what's unhealthy. Now here's your hosts, Julie and Tammy, helping you live well by filling your plate well.
Welcome to Fill Your Plate Now, where we talk about all things farm to table, including health and nutrition. And along that lines, there's been something in the news, newspaper, media, every day lately about nutrition and health. Everything from the food guide pyramid to the dietary guidelines to the need for more high quality protein in our diets, uh, for the need for more healthy fats, and even information on diet and taking GLP-1s. There's so much out there. Sometimes it's hard to sort through it all. So today we have an expert who's going to be talking to us about nutrition and nutrition research in childhood health, precision nutrition, and women's health. Kristen Riglitz Johnson is with us, and she's the Director of Nutrition Research at National Dairy Council, where she oversees childhood health, precision nutrition, and women's health. Her body of work assessing the existing body of literature in these areas includes strategic planning and management of dairy-related research. And she belongs to a number of health and nutrition organizations for professionals. She's a registered dietitian, and her bachelor's degree in biology was from the University of Northern Iowa, her master's of science, human nutrition from Kansas State University, and her PhD was in nutritional science from Arizona State University. I am anxious to talk to you more, Kristen, and hear a little bit about the research that you've been doing and some of the findings. Welcome.
Well, thank you very much. It's great to be here.
And I think I have to start off and say, as a registered dietitian, there's so many different areas you can go into. How did you decide on research and specifically the areas you're studying now?
So I always call it an et cetera background. I always tended to chase what I found most interesting at the time for different reasons throughout my career. But I would say, I do practice nutrition science and I use my RD license in a different way. And what really got me into this space was through stretch projects in the startup world. So once I left my postdoc, and I will admit, I thought I was going to stay in the academic realm because I was always very focused on bench science or clinical trials. Um, and I started working on projects that were not necessarily specific to my direct training. And that had a lot to do with nutrigenomics, different genetic panels, learning just how different it is writing for a consumer audience or a white paper versus an academic journal, and really figuring out how to translate science. And I would say that discrepancy between doing the science and getting the science out there um, is what really probably got me interested into where I am right now in my career and trying to really grow that body of sound science, but also make sure that it's science that can be used in everyday scenarios, right? I mean, if it's just science for the sake of science sitting on a shelf, it's going to stay there. But if there's that goal of, the individual can actually use this information today, right now, I think that's what makes it really exciting for me.
Dealing with childhood health from a very young age, clear through to 18, correct?
Correct.
Yeah. How do you divide those age groups up? Because there's such a difference between maybe a difference between a 2-year-old and a high schooler.
Yeah, that's a great question because one of the biggest challenges in this space, like you said, childhood isn't just one uniform period. It's a series of very distinctive developmental stages. And so I tend to think about it in these key phases. I start with what we call the first 1,000 days, and that really is the time period that spans pregnancy. So from the moment of conception to age 2, so 24 months. And that is where we really see the development and the foundation for all of our cognitive health throughout the rest of our lives. And that period is just incredibly important because that's when the brain is forming its basic structure. So you see a lot of rapid growth, you see a lot of different connections forming, you see that early sensory processing. And those are just foundational skills for cognition that everything else builds on. And then we move into the phase that's the toddler and preschool years. And this is where that cognitive development, and I'm really going to focus on cognitive development today because it's such an emerging and exciting area. But that's where it becomes visible. We really start to see it in everyday behavior of kids. And we start to see improvements in attention span. We start to see them becoming, their own individual people and being able to problem solve. Language is rapidly developing. And so now we're starting to see these multi-step interactions becoming possible. And then we move into the school age period. And this is really about 6 or 7. So think of kindergarten through elementary, so to the 5th or 6th grade. And again, this is where kids are starting to refine those earlier skills. This is where they're really starting to focus and work on emotional control, um, memory, executive function, being able to focus for longer periods of time. And this is really that foundation for learning, being able to process information, retaining it, and applying it. And then finally, we have adolescence. And there are different definitions for adolescence, but when we're talking, for the most part, we're going to be talking about 12 years of age up until 18. We're capturing, adolescence includes puberty, and that hits kids at different times. But if we really start kind of those tween years when they get into middle school throughout the high school years, that is a solid block. Even though there's still changes within that period too. But
Yeah, very distinct stages, it sounds like. Let's go back to the first 1,000 days.
yeah, so iodine is one of it. Luckily, it's finally getting the attention it deserves. But I would say iodine is one of the most important nutrients that is not talked about when it comes to the first 1,000 days. Um, the most readily available source of iodine is going to be iodized salt, right? Like what you can get at the grocery store. There's a reason that it's iodized. You just don't get that same thing when you're doing Himalayan salt or some of these more artisanal types of salt. The second highest source of iodine is dairy. So that is, at least in the United States, I would also say fish or seafood is a high source, but um, we don't tend to consume that in as high of quantities as other countries. So I would say that is one that I talk a lot about just because it's so overlooked. Choline is one that's really crucial. High quality protein, like you mentioned, is a basic building block. B vitamins, but another one is fat. And that's why, especially when kids are young, we really want them to be consuming whole fat dairy, is because they need those phospholipids, they need those fatty acids to help with the cells, help create those neuronal connections. And so those are just a couple. There's um, one of the things that we do like to make sure that we're talking about, since I am an advocate for dairy, is 7 of the building blocks that have been identified from the American Pediatric Academy is they are found in dairy. So whether it's vitamin A, it's those B vitamins, high quality protein, fatty acids, iodine, um, those are found in dairy.
What would be some of the foods you've been consuming and in what kind of quantity?
As much as I talk about dairy, dairy is not a magic bullet. We can't look at just one food source and one nutrient in isolation. It's really looking about dietary patterns, what you eat day after day, week after week, right? That is uh, really what truly matters. And so I just want to put it out there because it is, Tammy, I know both of us are moms. Being pregnant is hard. Being a mom is hard. Being a parent is hard. But you get so much unsolicited advice, and it can be such an overwhelming time period that I say that because if you don't have the healthiest meal or you think you made a mistake, the great thing about eating is you get to make a really good choice the next time you eat. And so focusing on a diverse diet, really eating the rainbow when it comes to fruits and vegetables, trying new things. And that can also be touch and go since there's sometimes are sensory issues during the pregnancy period. Um, Yogurt is usually a great way for people who either are lactose intolerant or they might be having some of those sensory issues. It's, usually cold. You can get different flavors. It's easy to consume, easy to grab and go. Um, Cheese and, in moderate quantities throughout the day can make other foods taste even better. Again, it's a good way to get a concentrated source of nutrients, especially when you're not feeling like eating a lot. Milk is always a great way to just round out any meal, right? Most of us do not get the recommended servings of dairy in a day, and just adding one more glass of milk to our entire day, not even at every meal, but just to our, overall day can make a huge amount of difference. And then I'm going to sound like every other dietitian that you have probably talked to, whole grains are really important. Healthy fats, right? So avocados, olive oil, nuts and seeds, if you can consume them and you don't have an allergy, lean proteins, all of those, you know, are like I said, I'm not giving information that probably is that novel that they haven't heard before. But I think just, you know, trying new things, just trying to the the name of the game is finding healthy foods that you like and you'll actually eat. And then just trying to be creative in terms of adding some new foods to your diet or just trying to make the meal as balanced as possible. I think if you look at it as kind of a game, it can make it more fun and sometimes honestly makes it a little bit easier to do versus being a chore or feeling like it's, you know, a right or a wrong way to do it and looking at it in those absolutes. In preschoolers, especially when we're talking about cognitive performance, we know it's still emerging. So they're still working on these. They're not fully developed skill sets yet. So things like attention span, we still have to be patient, right? And we have to model and be the adults and show them, something to emulate. Being able to do task accuracy, we're going to be looking at gross motor skills going into some of those fine motor skills. And so we really want to make sure that we are continuing that nutrition foundation that started, during the first 1,000 days when they didn't have as much choice as what they ate versus what was being put in front of them. Um, into this rule of, or not this rule, but into more of a role of offering foods that continue to support it, that are fun, they're tasty, they're easy for them to handle, they're probably easy to grab and go, um, especially in terms of, you know, families are busy these days. If you can grab a cheese stick or you can grab one of those, dairy-based smoothies, um, that can that can just make getting nutrition so much easier. And I think when we're talking about nutrition during this time and what it's supporting, we're always looking for nutrient dense. These are little bodies. They just can't handle the same amount of food as you and I can. Their calorie needs are not the same. So we're trying to make every bite count. And again, like you said, they're not all going to be perfect. There are going to be days that they're going to be having Cheez Its and gummy bears. And sometimes that's okay. That's what you need to do to get through the day. But if you can also sneak in, that glass of milk and a banana at the beginning of the day, or, the apple and peanut butter to go along, or maybe kind of try to limit the gummy bears, right? That they're already full, so they don't eat as many. I think just, those small things we keep offering, especially because now they're learning autonomy, also being able to give them some choices, right? If we're talking about fruit, do you want the banana or do you want the orange? You don't have to give them every choice, but I think allowing them to have some say in that decision can also encourage healthy eating behaviors. And not just for preschoolers. I mean, as an adult, that works on me too. If I limit my choices, there's a good chance I'm not going to reach for the ice cream, even though it's still dairy friendly and in moderation. Ice cream is fine, but I might actually have a full meal before I get to the dessert.
I like that, offering choices, because it's giving them a little bit of control. And as a preschooler, I think they're trying to gain a little control, but they still, as you had said, are still developing. But I think that's a great idea, giving them healthy choices, but giving them choices. That's great.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it is just, what is realistic for families? How do we help them where they're at now, make these changes or just little nudges to help them meet their nutrient needs? It doesn't have to be an overhaul. And one of the reasons that, I continue to advocate for dairy is that for most kids and families, it's familiar, it's accessible, and it's really easy to incorporate into routines.
For small children like that too, it's very easy to eat in bite-sized pieces, things like yogurt or cottage cheese or small cheese bites.
Right.
It's so nutrient dense that it's a great option for them. That's great.
Exactly.
So then when they get to grade school, we lose a little more control because they're in school part of the day and they're around their friends or they're over at their friends. What are some of the things that are really important to remember about that developmental stage and the nutrients that they need and the foods that would be best to include in their diet?
Right. So when we're just talking about nutrients, and, again, I like to look at eating patterns as a whole versus single nutrients or very specific foods. But when we are talking about those nutrients that continue to support during these years, high quality protein is always going to be one of those cornerstone nutrients. It is necessary for so much when it comes to growth and development and maintaining, health, that it just I can't overstate how important high quality protein is. And I'm not saying that you have to have it in excess. It's just that is an important thing to be thinking about. Um, I know, in the past, I'm a child of the 80s. Low fat was very much all the rage. I would say fat flexibility, and really understanding that you can have some higher fat items, whether it's from, you know, uh, plant-based oils, whole milk, different cuts of meat. There is a place for every food in the diet, and fatty acids are important for cognition, brain development, and just the functions of the brain. Um, you know, I would say all vitamins are important, right? Because if you are not feeling good in one area or you're having issues, whether it's being tired because you don't have enough B vitamins or um, your immune system is underperforming because you are not eating enough calories or you are, deficient in some vitamins, those are all going to affect your learning. um, and so that's where I wouldn't say just focus on the ones that we know enhance cognitive health. Your B vitamins, your um, choline continues to be an important one. Um, but really, again, just going back to that balanced diet and just trying to make every day, as many good decisions as you can. And the other thing I would really emphasize is now that we're getting into the school years, we need more um, long term energy. As much as I'd like to take multiple naps during the day, for most of us, it's not possible. So, really trying to understand that now it's not just the foods, but it's also how we space out foods, right? So, making sure that we have that healthy, well balanced breakfast to get us through to lunch. Um, this is where, when kids come home, having a nutritious snack before they start doing homework can be really beneficial to kind of refuel them. And then again, having a well balanced meal at night to help them with sleep, help them recover so they're ready for the next day. So, I think I didn't answer your question directly. It was more of a vague one, but I think it's really important that we look at these bigger picture outcomes. Things like IQ, academic achievement, long-term language development, they're all really important, but as of right now, the evidence is still emerging for what is, the right dose, the right foods. So that's where we want to continue just emphasizing healthy eating patterns. Um, but we do know, again, just tying it back to dairy, that dairy is one of the most nutrient dense foods that anybody can eat, but especially for kids, it's just so easy. It is also the top source of a number of shortfall nutrients. And what I mean by shortfall nutrients are nutrients that most of the population underconsume. Most of us don't get enough vitamin D. We don't consume enough calcium. We don't consume enough fiber, and we don't consume enough potassium. And dairy contains three of those four. It's not so great on the fiber front, but if you paired it with a whole grain, you'd have your bases covered.
Great example. And I love the thought of infusing nutrients into your body throughout the day by frequent meals and snacks and having a good breakfast. And then they have lunch at school and then having a snack when they come home. And then an evening meal and maybe even a snack before they go to bed if they're in a rapid growth spurt and hungry. But I think that's a great comment. Thank you. That's a good thing to remember because then from there they go into that 12 to 18 or 17-year-old phase, and they have even more independence and rapid growth, a lot of muscle development, cognitive changes occurring. What do you think is the most important about that age group to remember developmentally, mentally, and nutrition wise?
So I think one of the most important things to remember about that group is the brain is still developing. So we tend to look at that group either as an extension of older children, right? That they're just kids, but a little bit older, or research has treated them like young adults versus really looking at them as their own distinct group that has unique needs and unique health outcomes. And so remembering that again, the brain is still forming. I don't think our prefrontal cortex, which is where we actually learn like consequences, is fully developed until the age of 23 or 27. So, that makes a lot of sense, right? When we're saying, like, what were you thinking? Well, what they were thinking and how it related to the outcome might not be what we were thinking as adults, but some of that also is experience. I think this is also going back to autonomy, where kids are more likely to be influenced by their peers than just at home. And so even though, you know, the caregiver's role is always going to be beneficial, it's always going to be important in terms of modeling behavior. We now have different influences, such as our friends, such as online, social media. If they're on streaming platforms, there's so much nutrition information and ads that speak to kids on, like Twitch. Um, they also are putting in more vigorous sports at this time, which really now we're both thinking mentally, but we have this extra physical demand on the body. If kids are, you know, not only are they going through puberty and they have hormone changes, but if they're participating in higher impact sports. Um, and so, again, going back to that well balanced diet, making sure that they are getting the calories that they need. This is honestly a problem that we see, especially in young female adolescents, where there's a caloric deficit that affects performance. They're just not getting the energy that they need to function at their best. Um, Again, not being afraid of fats. Fat flexibility is still really important. And I would say in this group particularly, what we have to think about in the food industry is making sure that we are meeting teenagers specifically where they're at. So it's no longer just meeting parents, it's speaking to them directly. What are their attitudes, their beliefs? What information are they getting and where? What flavors do they like? What what health attributes do they think dairy has? And so then we also get into marketing and messaging, which is not my area of expertise, but it is very important because we need to make sure that the science does support what those goals are, and really understanding um, that we need to continue not just building the foundation, but now this is where we also see a rapid decline in dairy intake, right? And so dairy doesn't stop being one of the most nutritious foods. It just gets replaced by things like energy drinks, or other sugar sweetened beverages. So this is really a group that making sure that they continue those nutritious and healthy eating patterns that they, started in childhood is so important because those will carry on into their adult years, and they need to be the ones making the choice. They can't be, talked at or told. They really have to have some skin in the game and make these decisions of their own accord.
And I would think snacks are a huge piece of helping them meet those nutrient needs because I know, particularly like high school, they leave the house early. If they have sports, they're doing the sports after school. They may not get home till 6 at night, and they'll have blocks of time where they won't eat from lunch on till maybe 6, 8 hours if lunch is early. So, any recommendations on what kind of snacks they can pack in their backpacks?
I would say that this is one of those areas that yogurt is becoming really interesting. There's now so many different formulations, and some of them are shelf staples. You see some of the packaged smoothies now that are really easy to grab and go. Um, you know, it, every school or every learning environment may have some nuances to it about, if kids are able to get snacks outside, between classes, if it's just limited to lunch hours, after school, what is available. But I think the big thing here is making sure that, healthy foods are available. They're in formats and flavors that kids are familiar with and they like, um, and that it's easy. I would say, one of the things we talk a lot about is at the end of the day, nutrition is important, but that's not what usually drives decisions. Taste will always trump, convenience, it'll trump nutrition. And then aftertaste, convenience is probably the next biggest one. And nutrition, yeah, we all know it's important, but when we're really hungry, a lot of us aren't reading nutrition labels. We're grabbing for what's right in front of us. And so, whether it's having some of those grab and go things in the pantry, cheese sticks actually last for a couple of hours in a bag. So grabbing a cheese stick, if you know you're going to have a early morning snack or a mid morning, is a great way to get a quick concentrated source of nutrients that are beneficial. And then again, just finding those moments during the day. It doesn't have to be a full meal. It can be, um, you know, just a bite here and there. But this is where I go back to, you know, meeting people where they're at and what are those easy, simple things that we can do that make something like this easier. And, a lot of things we don't have to completely overhaul our diet. It's really about just changing one or two things along the way. And, going back to just one more serving a day, whether that is in the form of yogurt, which also is really emerging as a food,
Kind
or
of a superfood, yes.
yeah. I think a good name, what I would like to see yogurt eventually called is like a performance fuel drink, right? Or performance fuel food, because not only on its own are we seeing that it may, have some unique cognitive benefits, but we also know that with, the probiotics, it's working on that gut brain function. We also have a health claim. We know that it helps prevent type 2 diabetes and it influences glucose satiety. So, yeah, I'm all in when it comes to yogurt. I think it is one of the easiest, best tasting, and just simplest foods that we can add to our diet. Um, that just has so many benefits.
Talk for a second about that gut brain connection because we talk about it as dietitians. I don't know if the average listener knows the connection between the gut and the brain.
Yeah. So, uh, when we're talking about the gut brain interaction, we're really talking about the signals and the hormones that get sent between the brain and your intestine, right? There are both hormones. So, we hear a lot about GLP-1, but um, different hormones such as GLP-1 or different enzymes actually have shown to maybe have some impacts on cognitive performance. Um, we know that hormones such as leptin or ghrelin can make us either feel full or they tell us, hey, like I need more fuel in my body. I'm hungry. It's time to eat. So that's just an example of how our gut helps regulate the choices that we make or when we're eating and nutrition, but it goes even deeper than that. So we know that the signals that are, sometimes you just say, I had this gut feeling, and you make a choice based on that gut feeling. And somehow that was the right choice. I think that's the best example, even though it's not a scientific answer, um, of what that gut brain connection is. We're still looking at those specific mechanisms. We're still looking at interventions, but we know that your microbiome, the activity that's happening in your gut, whether it's your stomach, your small intestines, your large intestines, it is having effect on the rest of your body. Um, and one of those is the brain. It's, helping you learn. It's helping you pay attention. It's helping. There are some ties that we have seen with certain cognitive disorders as we age and the microbiome. And so, this is still very much an emerging area. We are really just starting to put some resources behind this to truly understand, um, especially in the space of dairy, how, what exactly is going on. But I think, not only the short answer is, and I apologize, I use so many words to say something so simple, but your gut health impacts everything else. And that includes your brain health.
That's so fascinating, I think. Everything that's emerging now is science. And I know also you're dealing in the precision nutrition area. Could you define that so our listeners know what that is and how it works?
People have heard quite a bit about personalized nutrition. And when we talk about precision nutrition, personalized nutrition is really for one individual. We're going to look at all the different factors they have going on. What is their unique, uh, gut microbiome makeup? What is their unique health status? What is their environment? What are their social factors? And we take all this information in and we make recommendations based on that one individual. But a lot of our recommendations, and especially when it comes to nutrition, we're making them at the population level. And it it wouldn't make sense for us to try to get to that granular level of each individual person. And that's where thinking about personalized nutrition, it's always kind of a three-stage process. First, you have your population recommendations, and that's where precision nutrition comes in, which I'll talk about here just in a minute. And then you get that general, recommendation and you say, okay, how do I further personalize this to myself? And that's when then you would take into these other factors, you would talk to your doctor and you would further individualize that. And then ideally, you would talk to your registered dietitian who can really make those impactful changes that are unique just to you and continue to get feedback because it's not a one and done. But precision nutrition is saying, how can we look at a population and make even more targeted and precise nutrition recommendations based on different ways that individuals tend to behave alike, have similar biomarkers, have similar, health concerns. Maybe they live in similar environments. or there are other things that are specific not just to the individual, but as a to a larger group as a whole. And it's really trying to find out how can we, take we've had nutrition recommendations that honestly have been pretty good for a number of years, but how can we make those even more personalized, staying at that group level, right? Just instead of having four groups, right? Men, women, older, younger, or pregnant, or however, you would divide them up now. It might be going to say, individuals who are between 65 and 85 who have type 2 diabetes and um, are at high risk for cardiovascular disease, but are at a healthy weight with no other issues. These would be recommendations that would be most impactful or relevant for you.
It's amazing the changes in science and how it is getting to be more precise and we're learning more every day. Um, with all the research that you review and the areas you work in, what do you see coming down the road as far as future research?
When I think where research is going, I'm going to speak in the childhood area because that's what I've been really focused on, at least in the past couple of weeks. It's it's really about getting more precise. So many of our studies are observational or cross-sectional. Um, and I think we're moving beyond just asking are kids consuming dairy to we want to understand how kids are consuming dairy. When are there certain times of day that it really matters or it can make a difference? Um, there's one group out of Canada that we're working with, Dr. Nick Bellissimo, and he really looks at the context of dairy in that snacking arena, right? How milk and yogurt, different fat levels, and timing throughout the day can impact things like blood sugar, gut hormones, short term cognitive performance. Um, that being said, we also see a real need to build and strengthen the evidence base. So, we have a lot of information on how dairy helps kids grow, how it helps them accumulate, bone strength and bone density, especially in younger children and preschoolers. But now we really want to take that into longer term outcomes, including academic performance. Like we just talked about, the gut brain axis, we're really trying to understand how specific foods can really influence the microbiome and what that means for brain and mental health. And then I would say one of the things that is very close to my heart is expanding research in adolescents. This has been a group that surely, in my opinion, has been somewhat overlooked. They've been kind of lumped in with other groups in research. And I really think that we need to have a more concentrated effort at of research, especially across all nutrition, interventions in this group. And so I would say to kind of wrap that all up, the future research is really about connecting the dots, right? So how do we link nutrition, dietary intake to real world outcomes um, through just more rigorous, targeted, and age specific studies?
We've covered a lot of territory today. Really interesting information. If you wanted our listeners to walk away with three um, things to remember, what would they be?
If I had to leave you with three things, I think at the end of the day, it'd be this. First, dairy is a simple, reliable way to nourish growing kids. It delivers a lot of nutrition and foods that family already know and they use every day. Second, it's not just about long term health. There's growing evidence that milk and yogurt can support kids in how they think and perform in the moment, especially as part of a balanced snack. And that's really important because that helps to improve the sense of urgency or the ability to, again, go back and connect those dots, right? If I'm feeling an effect right away, then I'm more likely to continue with that behavior. And then third, we're just beginning to unlock the potential of yogurt. You talked about how it's a superfood. And I really think yogurt as a whole, but especially in that gut brain connection, this is a really exciting space. And we're going to see a lot more in the future.
Oh, well, hopefully you will be able to come back and update us on a future podcast. This has been really fascinating. And thank you so much, Kristen, for taking the time to be with us today. We really appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's always good to see you, Tammy.
Good to see you too.